Today on CityCast Philly, it's the Friday News Roundup. We're talking about who Temple University has named as its acting president. City Council has a hearing to discuss teen programs for the summer. And what's happening at the former Philadelphia Energy Solutions oil refinery site in South Philly. It's Friday, April 14th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Joining me this week is Oliver Sabo, staff writer at Temple News. Hey, Oliver.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
And independent journalist Kyle Bagenstos. Kyle, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trinae.
Sure. This week, we experienced our first 80-degree days. So as an icebreaker, I got to ask y'all, what's y'all favorite spots in the city to enjoy the warm breeze?
Yeah, I usually, when I can get down to Rittenhouse, I love hanging out there for a couple hours. I'm a big allergy person, so the pollen's starting to hit, so that hasn't been too fun. But yeah, loving the nice weather.
Yeah, Kyle, what about you?
I hear you on the allergies, Oliver. I just took my pill a couple minutes ago. I love going to the Wissahickon. I'm up in Mount Airy. We actually moved here because of the Wissahickon, and love getting down there to the creek. And there's been reporting in the Inquirer even about how much cooler it is there in the summer, and I can definitely attest to that. So that's my spot.
I love that. Those are great spots. I love going to, there's a lot of big green spaces in Parkside in West Philly. I like to pull over, walk around like the Please Touch Museum area. There's baseball fields. People like to ride their bikes and just do some nice peaceful walking. Those are some great spots. All right, so let's get into some of the top stories this week. Oliver, you've been covering some major news coming out of Temple for several weeks now, but let's talk about the change in leadership. Tell us about who they've named as their acting president.
Yeah, it's been a crazy semester just with all the leadership change. There's been a grad strike and then a lot of campus safety issues. But yeah, it started to slow down. And I think one of the reasons is because they named Joanne Epps as the acting president. They were clear that it was not an interim title, which was interesting. But she was named on Tuesday. And so that's followed a couple weeks of a senior advisory board that is made up of a lot of top university officials who have been looking. So Joanne Epps has a lot of Temple experience. She's been here since 1986 at the Temple Law School. She was named dean in 2008.
And she was the provost too, right?
She was, yeah. She was until Jason Wingard kind of did a leadership shakeup and she took a sabbatical. But yeah, she's back. She was almost ready to retire, and that kind of board asked her to come back. And she loves Temple. In her press conference, she talked about how much she values the university, how much she cares about it. So she's excited to kind of lead this search and, hold things down while they launch that national search.
Now, for full disclosure, I graduated from Temple in 2010. And Oliver, you're a current junior?
I am.
So what's been the reaction of students and staff on campus?
I think you hear a little bit of everything. A lot of people were kind of ready for Wingard to go, but there's also a lot of people who were saying, if anybody was in his position, some of the campus safety issues are out of his control. They are citywide issues. But I think, the general feel around here when he announced his resignation was a little bit of shock, a little bit of surprise, just because it was so short of a tenure. It was not even 2 years.
Interesting. We'll be looking forward to reading your excellent coverage as that story develops. Speaking of student excellence, I just want to give a shout out to the students who got involved in the Democratic primary mayoral debate on Fox 29 this week. Shout out to TU. It was great that they were involved.
Yeah.
I also want to add that according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, former council member Derek Green has dropped out of the mayoral race. And earlier this week, former council member Maria Quinones Sanchez dropped out the race too.
Yep.
Kyle, you've been focusing on a really interesting story. The former site of the Philadelphia Energy Solutions, or short PES, as a lot of people know it as, the former oil refinery that had a really big explosion back in 2019. And now, that was a debunked. It was like one of the largest, right? Largest refineries on the East Coast.
That's correct.
But
Yeah.
now there's new ownership. So, what do people want this site to be now?
Yeah, so we're coming up on 4 years. I'm sure people remember the news about the explosion. And I think the thing that stands out in a lot of people's mind was that 38,000 pound piece of machinery getting blasted across the Schuylkill into West Philly. I mean, quite an explosion. So coming up on 4 years of that, Hilco is a firm that came in, a developer that scooped up the property afterward and has been working on turning the site into mainly warehousing and a kind of like life sciences campus, so like pharmaceutical and other uses.
Okay.
So that hasn't really changed too much over the past couple years, but I think there's bigger questions about the site. I mean, it's a huge 1,300 acre industrial property. It's just kind of plopped down right in the middle of South, Philadelphia, that has been more or less cut off from the city, over that entire history. Is just this industrial parcel of land, really blighted and ugly. And so I think a lot of people are interested in seeing, can we reintegrate that piece of property back into the city, right? And so I think there's a lot of questions still swirling about some of those kind of, tangential type uses at the property. Things like, are they going to regrid that into the city? Are they going to allow for public access, pedestrian access? So these are still questions that very much remain 3.5, 4 years after the explosion. And that's what I was exploring for Grid, kind of what we could get on the latest.
And you talk to so many different people. You talk to neighbors, city planners, developers. Everyone has an idea of what they want to use this big space of land for. But what I found interesting in your article, you write that it's sometimes also about transparency, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, a lot of people across these different groups, the public, the planners, I think a lot of people want to see the same things, public access, waterfront access, beautification, these sorts of things. And, Hilco has a lot of really nice renderings on their website of a really green, gridded kind of place. But as I said in the story, pictures aren't proof. Proof will come out first in the paperwork, right? Like what actual plans are going to be out there. And there we don't have much at all. I think that's one of the main criticisms was that Hilco hasn't really shown blueprints, layouts for the property, this sort of thing. And, people were careful how they spoke to me, but it didn't sound absolutely great at first blush. There was a road that they had put in along the riverfront that could potentially, keep the river trail from being extended down there. So, early indications, maybe Hilco isn't thinking about the same priorities as some of these other groups.
Interesting. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some maybe underreported stories. Kyle, you focus a lot of your work in environmental reporting. What else are you working on?
Yeah, so we actually just had a piece come out on Grid's website this week, following up on the chemical spill in the Delaware River from a couple weeks ago, which I'm sure everybody
Oh,
who lives in
yes.
Philly
Oh, we remember that.
remembers from their phone blast. So yeah, I think the city dodged a bullet with any drinking water impacts, but we were kind of following up on, especially on localized impacts to the Bristol area in Lower Bucks County. I used to report up there for the Bucks County Courier-Times, and there's
Okay.
pretty heavy industry along the riverfront up there. And what stuck out to me was that every time I used to drive up there, there was a series of kind of highways that would take you through the area. And I would sometimes smell this kind of burning plasticky smell around a chemical facility.
Hmm.
And that was the facility where this particular building was that triggered the leak. And I know from my experience there that there is regular air emissions of these same three chemicals that cause such concern in Delaware River that just come out of the plant stacks, like just by, it's legal, it's just as part of their air permit. And, there's just a lot of air pollution up that way like I said, with the highways, with this facility. And so I think it's, I don't want to belittle what Philadelphia faced. I mean, you don't want to have anything in your drinking water, but I think people have already kind of moved on from that. And people near industrial sites like this plant in Bristol, and as we said earlier, like this former PES site in Philly that used to cause mass amounts of air pollution for neighbors, people are living with this, as a regular fact of life in a lot of these areas. And there's, linkages to asthma and other illnesses and things like that. So the piece just kind of explores that, there are massive amounts of these chemicals being released from that facility every year to people downwind in Lower Bucks County and across the river in New Jersey. And also, I didn't even expect this, but we found that the water contamination is still continuing a little bit up there. So they've been working on doing cleanup. But the
Okay.
Pennsylvania Department of Environmental
Mm.
Protection said that there is residual weeping of discolored material still coming from the pipe, and they're working on bringing in sandbags to kind of block it. So I think there's still, worth keeping an eye on exactly what the fallout of that incident is going to be to the ecosystems up there.
Interesting. Are there any like I guess that experience of smelling chemicals? I've experienced that before driving down going down to like to Delaware, and there's like this one bridge that you just hit and you're like, "Oh, God, did someone fart?" And you're like, "No, it wasn't me. It's the chemicals." But are there ways that like companies can I don't know, like protect residents or people in that area?
Yeah, so by law, I mean, there is a legal limit to what chemicals can produce. And technically, they're supposed to be updating their filtration technology every once in a while to have the best practices. But, what's on paper isn't often what happens in actuality. And so I think one of the really big flaws of the law, too, and this is something that the Clean Air Council pointed out in my piece, was that they don't do anything for cumulative effects. So, every facility has its own limit. But if you have 5 or 6 facilities, near each other, and they're all emitting, there's no rule on the cumulative effect of the air quality nearby. So that's oftentimes where residents are really exposed, is that kind of gap in the law, that gap in the protection.
Interesting. Oliver, are you working on any stories this week? Any underreported stories that you want to highlight this week?
Yeah, I think a couple of things in the fallout of the new acting president. There are a couple interesting things. Are one is the Malcolm Kenyatta, state rep who represents Temple's area, introduced some legislation that would add a couple members to state appointed members to the board.
Why is that significant though? Like why have those members on the board?
The state lawmakers want a little bit more state oversight in Temple, especially what's going on with safety, and then obviously coming off the strike, the Tugs strike, and everything. So there are a number of state appointed members on the board already, but this would be adding one more for each position. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking into what that would mean for Temple and kind of the history of state appointed members on the board.
That's interesting. Let's get into some good news. And Kyle, speaking of State Rep Malcolm Kenyatta, there was a story this week that happened also in the North Philly district. Tell us about that.
Sure, just let me get my quick Temple plug in though. I was also Temple 2010, and so we got 3 Temple people
Wait,
here.
what? Kyle, wait. Oh, you buried the lead. Oh man. Okay.
We
Wow.
probably shared a class or two.
We
And
must have.
walk right
Oh
past each other.
wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. But now Malcolm Kenyatta too. So Temple Owls are
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes. Temple
Absolutely.
Owls everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually saw Representative Kenyatta on North Broad this week, near Broad and Dauphin. There's a charter school in Philly called Youth Build, which I think oftentimes has enrollment from some of the most at-risk kids in the city, kids who have, not stuck at other schools or have had, behavioral issues, this sort of thing. And basically it's, trying to get them into the trades, give them a useful skill and get them out there and get them a job, post-graduation. And it's been around for several decades, but I get the impression they've just been kind of floating, having to rent space. Well, now there's a $25 million renovation of an old Pico building on North Broad that is going to take place over the next year. And this program is going to have its very own home. It's a well-built building where, they can hammer away without disrupting anybody. There's going to be great, it sounds like, rooms and services where, kinds of behavioral services for students too, emotional support. And the Representative Kenyatta and State Senator Anthony Williams were there, and they really spoke just about how significant it is to do this and how much, how it really is truly good news. They were kind of on the media's case a little bit. There's only one TV station there. And they said, anytime, somebody shoots somebody in North Philly, you have so much media there in 10 minutes. But something like a $25 million renovation to, assist like the most vulnerable at-risk youth in our city doesn't draw the same attention. And it was a great point, but it was, I don't, this is supposed to be the good news. So the good news is that there are good things happening in the city. Yeah.
Yeah, and and it is great news. And speaking of teens, there was a conversation this week happening in City Council. I read in WHYY's reporting that they really are focusing on programming, especially in the warmer months. As we're getting closer to the warmer months, City Council is trying to figure out still their fiscal budget. And so they're talking to other departments about youth programming and strategies. And this comes after, there's been some recent incidents of large groups of teens downtown in the Fashion District, over by the casinos in South Philly. There's a carnival happening down there. But yeah, I really appreciate that that information and that kind of like openness from the representatives to kind of like give us that reminder as journalists, as media, to tell some different stories, and yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
It was great. There was like, at the ceremony, there was groundbreaking. There was, a dozen kids there that's part of this program, and they were turning them and tell them like, you guys are heroes too. You're going to be building our society. There was one student I talked with, his nickname was Ira. He's from Congo originally, and he, I think someone there said he was looking at, a life of maybe minimum wage, that sort of thing. He got into this program. He fell in love with architecture, and he actually interned with the architecture firm that's redesigning the building. And he has plans to go and pursue his degree in architecture. And what a great story! I mean, just like yeah.
I love that. That's a feel-good story. And also, speaking of young people doing amazing things, there was a story that came out of Philadelphia Tribune. A senior at Paul Robeson High School, Alyssa Perrin, West Philly native, she got accepted to Harvard. That's huge. And she's going to be majoring in biology. And she wants to play on the school's polo team. And she's had experience for years working with this group called Work to Ride, which is a nonprofit program outside of Philly. And they teach kids how to ride horses and take care of horses. Good luck, Alyssa, when you go to Harvard. Remember us. That's all I got for this week. Kyle, Oliver, thank you so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
Thank you again. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really fun.
It's time for the tip of the day, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. The Sixers are playing Game 1 of the first round of the playoffs Saturday at 1 p.m. They play the Brooklyn Nets. It's a home game, so make sure you leave early to get down and park your car or take SEPTA to Wells Fargo Center. Another tip, according to NBA.com, Sixers.com will post all playoff game dates and times and who they play against as it's determined. Now, I don't want to say this, but if there's a chance a game isn't played, ticket holders will receive an automatic refund from Ticketmaster. Tickets are sold on a first-come, first-served basis. If you have a tip of the day, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our lead producer is Laura Benchoff. Our producers are Abby Fritz and Elizabeth Kama. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Brittany Valentine. And our host is me, Trinae Nuri. Music is by Philly's Own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend and be safe. Bye, y'all.